Neuhaus is dedicated to promoting reading success for all. We attack illiteracy from 3 angles. We give teachers evidence-based strategies to teach reading. We provide parents of struggling readers with support and information. And we teach adults to read.
Giving the kids the Neuhaus strategies and letting them know that they can compete with anyone, that's our passion.
I know that the work that my teachers are investing in daily is working, and it's having a greater impact, not just on the students themselves, but with their families, with our community, with our city.
Welcome to the Neuhaus webinar on the Foundation of Comprehension, Oral, Language, and Listening. My name is Rebecca Tolson, and I'm Vice President of Literacy Initiatives. Andrew B. Miller, renowned researcher in the area of vocabulary development, stated, if we are to increase children's ability to profit from education, we will have to enrich their oral language development during the early years of schooling. Reading comprehension is the ultimate goal of reading. There are 2 components, decoding and language comprehension. Each is critical to skilled reading comprehension, but not sufficient alone. Each component is comprised of skills that are necessary for the skill development of the component. Fluency is the bridge of both decoding and language comprehension. Decoding involves instant word recognition, the ability to recognize words without conscious thought, the ultimate goal of decoding instruction. Sound symbol knowledge is making connections between letters and the sounds that they make. Structural analysis is recognizing different kinds of syllables and parts of words to decode long, unfamiliar words. Context is using words or pictures in the text, like surrounding words, phrases, sentences, and using illustrations. Language comprehension involves oral language and the knowledge of word meanings, which is the foundation of comprehension. World knowledge involves the accumulation of language through knowledge, experiences, and attitudes that readers link to the text. Strategic thinking involves reasoning, connecting ideas, monitoring, summarizing, repairing, and evaluating while reading. And lastly, inference making means making connections and filling in gaps the reader doesn't directly state. With a solid oral language base, students can instantly recognize words they are decoding. It is easier to decode or recognize a word that's in your oral language base than a word that you've never seen before. Oral language enables students to instantly attach meaning to the words they have decoded. In short, oral language is important to reading comprehension. With a solid oral language base, students can file, store, and retrieve words and world knowledge and create vivid mental images that help them remember and retrieve language. Students can engage in inner dialogue as they read. They can check their comprehension while reading and remember better what they have read. Students can use contextual clues when needed more efficiently and effectively because they can better predict an unknown word by using the meanings of the words that surround the unknown word. Language involves listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Oral language is listening and speaking. Written language is reading and writing. Oral language is the foundation of written language. As we are thinking about language structures, there is oral language and print language. There are two language processes. Receptive is taking in language through listening and reading. Expressive is using language through speaking and writing. Any way we think about language, language is important to understanding and expression. Here's a great resource for you to create a language-rich learning environment. In this manual, the colors and shapes of language, there are 21 units. There is a hierarchy of skills to build oral language. Naming is the first activity in this hierarchy. A naming activity allows for expressive language practice with a controlled pandemonium of naming on a topic like baseball teams. How many baseball teams can you name in a minute? This may be easy for a baseball fan, but difficult for someone lacking interest or background in watching baseball. Do you only support your local baseball team by going to a game or two every year? Do you watch baseball games on television throughout the season or only the playoff games? Let's give that a try. I'm going to time you. Let me grab my timer for 1 minute, and you will need a scratch piece of paper and a pencil. Now, we usually do this in teams or partners, and one person is a slasher, meaning they're going to make a slash mark for every baseball team that you name. And the other is the namer. But since you probably don't have a partner sitting next to you, we are just going to do this individually. So with a pencil and a scratch piece of paper, I'm going to give you 1 minute to name every baseball team you can think of without using any other resources like Google. Okay, so ready and begin. And stop. Please count up your slash marks and put that total and circle that number for me. How many baseball teams did you name in 1 minute? How many of you had a map of the US in mind when you were naming? If you used a map, did you name teams on the two coasts and then work toward the middle? This would be considered your retrieval plan. Now I'd like you to name another on another topic. So I'd like you to use slash marks, and I'm going to time for 1 more minute. This is going to be our last timing. I would like you to name US presidents. Ready? Begin. and stop. Please count up the number of slashes for how many presidents you were able to name in a minute. How many could you name in a minute? Put that number down and circle that number. What was your retrieval plan? Did you name current to past presidents or past to current presidents? So we want students to understand their source of knowledge. So what would your source of knowledge be about animals? What is your experience with animals? Do you have a pet? Do you go to the zoo? Have you read books about animals? So we build our source of knowledge based on experiences and learning. So if I may have gone places that to the zoo or places that would have exposed me to animals, or I may have just read books about animals, or a teacher taught a unit about animals. What about foods? If we had the topic of naming about fruits and vegetables, what would your retrieval plan be? Would you name things through in the grocery store and go through kind of the aisles and pick out where and go down and visualize those items and be able to name? Would you look in your refrigerator? Would you think about where things are placed and go through your refrigerator about where your fruits and vegetables? So the source of knowledge is important in as well as a retrieval plan. So here is another example of retrieval plans based by categories. And this is something that we are going to work on with our students. We could categorize our fruits and vegetables by berries, melons, citrus, or cruciferous. So if we put them in categories, that helps us retrieve and remember and understand. That's considered a retrieval plan. So what we would do next is we would total the four naming activities for 1 minute each. That number represents the number of items named in 2 minutes. To establish a number of items in 1 minute, divide that number by 2. Since we did an example of 2, I want you to total your numbers, your number for baseball teams and your number for presidents. So these are the benchmarks by grade level. To establish these, we tested students in these grade levels. We gave them standardized measures of reading comprehension and vocabulary. We also worked individually with each student. Those students who were at or above grade level on the 2 standard measures of vocabulary and reading comprehension were able to name at least the number of items you see here. Students who do not meet these benchmarks will need additional instruction to increase their oral language, vocabulary, and world knowledge. There is a screening on the Neuhaus website for oral language and naming to help you achieve your indicators and benchmarks for your students or your child. So which is a language-rich classroom? Classroom A or Classroom B? Even though there is a lot of talking, the important point is who is doing the talking. The answer is Classroom B. The students need to practice language. They are the ones that need to be talking. I love to hear a noisy classroom. It means that kids are talking and engaging. I like controlled pandemonium, we say. I like kids under the teacher's supervision to be able to express themselves. So we want the teacher to be teaching, but we also want those students to be using expressive language. Very, very important for us to think about how much talking is going on in your classroom from your students. So most of the units in the Neuhaus Colors and Shapes manual that I shared with you begin with a naming activity. Students will rapidly name things related to a chosen topic. They also rapidly name things related to the topic by categories, such as ways to travel by land, ways to travel by air, ways to travel by sea. So we're still on a topic, but we have it within categories. The key ideas to remember are that naming is rapid and everyone names together. So why rapid? Once students have instantaneously decoded a word, he or she must instantaneously attach meaning to that word. Rapidity of decoding and the attachment of meaning preserves the student's attention and frees up their cognitive resources for understanding the text the student is reading. Why everyone at once? We want to give every student equal opportunity to name as quickly and as much as they can. Waiting to be called on to answer slows down their thinking and limits responses. Always remember to ask for their retrieval plan. This can be done as students are naming or after naming is complete. You can lead by asking these two questions. What was your retrieval plan? How were you able to name all the items you named? Also, what is the source of your knowledge? Is it from an experience you've had, or have you learned about it from somewhere? If your child or students do not name items, then name for them. This builds knowledge through receptive language. They're going to receive those from you and then be able to build up to the place where they can express them. It just sometimes takes time. So think about modeling that language. The next activity in the oral language hierarchy is describing. Prior to this activity, you will need to locate objects or pictures of items related to a topic. The describing hierarchy starts by the teacher choosing 2 or 3 objects or pictures that are related to a topic. The students describe the object using these steps. They are first going to name the object the student names, not the teacher, not the parent. So I would ask the question, what is this object? Name the category the object belongs in. Naming the functions of the object. What is the object used for? And you can use a simile or a metaphor to describe the object using like or as, and then compare the object to another object. This is an example of the describing hierarchy for this object. I would ask the student, as the teacher, what is this object? And the teacher the student would say, this is a piece of paper. What is the category of this object? It is considered a school supply and can be found in the office supply section at a local store. What is the function of this object? And the student may respond, it is used for many things, such as writing stories, doing homework, writing a letter to a friend, or making a paper airplane. And I could use this word in figurative language. This paper is, and I would describe its attributes, like this paper is white, with blue lines and is a rectangular shape. And I could say that a piece of paper is as light as a feather, to use it as a simile. Now, the next part of that describing hierarchy is a comparison. I like to do a compare and contrast even, especially when compared to a book. These two items are both rectangular and contain white paper in them. However, the cover of the book is orange, and it is much heavier than a few pieces of paper as a contrast. Another easy boost to oral language is to have students respond in complete sentences. Students with language learning difficulties and English language learners may benefit from sentence frames that help them structure their language. So we could have them fill in the blanks as we read those sentence frames with a pause. The name of the object is, and we're going to give them that first part as a support or a scaffold. Naming and describing is a nice warm-up to the activity of listening to a story, which is our third activity. In preparation, the teacher or parent asks students to listen for interesting words on a topic. A few vocabulary words can be defined before reading the passage. The teacher or parent reads a passage to the student, and as students listen to a passage, the teacher or parent displays simple pictures that mark the actions, events, or key points. I'd like to read a story to you today, and I am going to display pictures as I read the story as an example of an interactive way for us to anchor the key points. The title of our story is A New Way to Travel. We see cars everywhere we go. Can you imagine a world without any cars? Cars have been around only for about 100 years. Before cars were invented, people traveled by horse or by carriage or a wagon pulled by a horse. Travel was very slow. At one time, cars were a rare sight on the city streets. Cars were very expensive. Most people could not afford them. It also took a long time to make a car. There were so many parts to put together. It took a few people many hours to put a car together. So there were not many cars available, even if you could afford one. A man named Henry Ford came up with an idea to make cars low cost and faster to make. His idea was known as an assembly line. To assemble a car, many workers stood in a line. Each worker was responsible for putting on only one part of a car. As a car moved down the line of workers, each worker put on their one part. With more workers and each worker responsible for putting on only one part, repeatedly, more cars were made in a shorter period of time. All the cars were similar, with the same parts and colors, and less expensive. With more cars available and at a more affordable price, more people could own cars. Soon, the city streets filled with cars, and a horse and wagon became a rare sight. So here is, if you look at the passage here on the slide, you'll see the suggested pictures that can be drawn or displayed while students listen to the passage. After listening to the passage, students answer questions that focus on key details and general understanding of the passage. The purpose of asking questions is to encourage students to think about a passage that they listened to or read. The continuum of questioning goes from simple to complex, but also follows an orderly structure so that students learn and remember content from informational text. Here is a continuum of questioning from simple to complex. The first part of the continuum is, what does the text say? These are the key details and general understanding, which are the goal. Next, how does the text work? This relates to the author's purpose and understanding the choice of vocabulary and syntax, which is our grammar. And the final part of the continuum is, what does the text mean? Here, we ask inferential and opinion questions that require evidence from the text. So after our passage that I read to you, I could ask these questions. How did people travel before cars? And I would go back, and I'm going to sneak back here. Okay, so we could go back and say people traveled by horse and buggy or a wagon before. Was travel fast at that time? No, travel was slow at that time. Why were there just a few cars 100 years ago? Because they were expensive. Cars were expensive 100 years ago, so there were few cars. How did Henry Ford help make cars available to more people? Henry Ford created the assembly line. Describe the assembly line. The assembly line was a line of people, each person putting one part on the car. This made cars, and the last question was, what made the cars less expensive to make? Well, when we have an assembly line, it took less time, which meant it took less money, so cars became inexpensive. So now we had a lot more cars on the street. So that would be an example of the questioning. The next activity, or activity 4 for oral language, is retelling. Initially, the teacher may want to model the retelling. Students then take turns retelling the passage using the picture prompt. Here is a rubric that you can use to monitor students' progress in retelling. You can see that you will get a good sense of their understanding of sentences, overall understanding of the passage, and use of vocabulary within the related to the passage. The first objective is complete sentences. The more we encourage students to use complete sentences, the better students will be at using complete sentences. So be sure to encourage that as we move them across the continuum of skills related to sentence building complete sentences, using them, identifying them in their reading. We also want to capture the most important ideas of each event. The picture prompts take away the dependence on memory to remember the events in the order of the events. This frees the students to focus on the meaning or importance of each event. Think about moving them across this continuum from beginning to mastery to even exemplary when it is related to capturing the salient or important ideas. Do they capture those important ideas, and are they in order? Which is our next area. So we want children to be able to sequence and remember the sequence of events. So does the students recognize that sequence? And if they do recognize that sequence, are they using key transitional words like first, then, next, finally? Can the students discriminate between first and last events? The next objective on the rubric measures students' understanding of vocabulary. Encourage students to listen to interesting words as they listen. Listening and retelling are great ways to increase vocabulary. So when I'm looking at the rubric, I might start with incorporating vocabulary words that are exactly used in the passage, and then move them to using appropriate synonyms for words from the passage, to exemplary being using vocabulary words from the passage in novel ways. Last is prosody. How fluently a student can retell a story without having a pause or hesitations. Increased understanding increases students' prosody. So the more they use language, and you can see this continuum of skills, such as their sentences, their syntax, their grammar, their vocabulary, their ability to sequence and order. This all measures how a student can be fluent when they're speaking and retelling a story. So I love this. This is found on our website, and the Neuhaus website, and you can download that for free. So use this as a great way to measure their retelling and understanding of all of those different components. So the activities we just reviewed build oral language. If you use one of these activities every day for 5 to 8 minutes, you will greatly impact your students' oral language. Every day. I believe in a slow drip. We want to make sure that it's intentional that kiddos build expressive and receptive language in the classroom or in their home. A 5-day plan might look like this. On day 4, students can listen to the passage again before you model a retell. I believe in repetition. Doesn't hurt to retell that story the next day and then have them either answer questions or retell the passage in their own words. Be sure you model a retell first, because they need that as an example of how to retell and how to connect words and combine words and use language. Although you may plan for a specific time of day to use one of these activities, oral language should be embedded in the entire day. Permeate the day with language. Next, I'm going to move to an activity. And I like to think of this as a bridge from oral to written. We call this a listing activity. Listing activities develop oral language and world knowledge. It promotes categorization skills and provides a framework for writing. Listing involves writing lists within a category. I encourage teachers or parents to scribe for listening. And the reason that I encourage scribing is because we don't want the mechanics aspect of writing to get in the way of their thinking of words. So when we're transitioning, I really like using scribing as a support to just see what they know on a topic. So if they have issues with mechanics, holding their pencil or writing or handwriting, take that out. So be their scribe. Let's see how words and language come out as expressive language at the oral level, and then, but they're seeing print. Now, as a reminder, and I don't think I mentioned this, the first 4 activities, naming, describing, listening to a story, and retelling, are all on the oral level. So the students don't have to see the passage. They just see those picture prompts to anchor those main ideas. We really want it just to be language at the oral level. Now here's your transition where you are writing for them, so they're seeing the words in print. And that's why I consider this the bridge, because now they're seeing written language. They don't have to produce that. You can produce it, but they are seeing it if you're making lists. So that gives them that support to transition. Here's an example of listing within a category. Our topic may be foods, and we might make a list of foods that the kiddos can name that are green, foods that are red, foods that are round. And we want them, just like your naming activity, we want it to be rapid. So if you have a classroom, just have the students just calling out those words, and whatever words you can hear and think of, you're going to write them down on a list. They can see you writing, they can see the written language, but that mechanics isn't a barrier quite yet, because we want them to think and say. Think expressive language. So here we're making lists within categories on a topic. I love it. Verbal to written. So some additional activities that promote metacognitive skills, or the idea of thinking about thinking. To understand what a child or a student is reading, a reader needs to understand the type of text he or she is reading. Some texts tell a story, which are known as narrative and literary text. Some text gives information and is known as expository or informational text. Knowing the type of text guides the strategic reader in their thinking. For a narrative text, we want students to identify the WH words: who, what, when, where, and why. What we'd like the students to do is put these WH words, the words you see listed here, on small index cards. Now, I like to use those half index cards. Actually, can order them online and get them, or at the office supply store, you can sometimes find them. So they're not like a 3x5, they're half of that. They're small enough for the students to move and manipulate. As the students listen or read a story, ask them to move the WH cards when they can answer these questions. Who is the story about? Where or when, the setting of the story, did the story take place? What is the most important event? And why did the most important event happen? So I'd like to read a story to you today, just to give you an example of a story, a narrative story that we could tell, that we could use our WH cards. So as an example, and while I'm locating my story to read, I would like you to put your WH cards on us, maybe 5 pieces of scratch paper so we can practice this together. The title of the story I'm going to read to you today is The Midas Touch. When you hear one of the WH words that you think answers that question, I want you to move that index card down or your scratch piece of paper down. The multisensory and the engagement of listening for the who, the what, the where, the when, and the why is very important for that metacognitive. See how many cards you can pull down when I read this story. The Midas Touch. King Midas lived a long time ago. He was a rich king who lived in a grand castle with his young daughter. He had great chests of jewels and coffers of gold. He spent hours each day fingering and counting his riches. One day, a stranger dressed in ragged clothes came to his door and asked for a meal and a place to spend the night. King Midas was so busy with his riches that he paid little attention to the stranger and to his requests, but gave him food and shelter for the night. In the morning, the stranger wished to thank King Midas for his kindness. He found King Midas in his counting room, counting his riches. After thanking the king, the stranger said, "I see that you have many jewels and much gold. How would you like even more gold?" King Midas was delighted with the prospect of obtaining more gold. "When tomorrow's sun creeps in through the window, everything you touch will turn to gold," said the stranger. King Midas hardly slept that night. He sat in a chair by his bedroom window, waiting for the new day to dawn. And when the new day dawned, he touched the chair he was sitting in, and it turned to gold. He touched the curtains that hung by the window. They turned to gold. With great joy, King Midas touched everything in his bedroom, and everything turned to gold. He quickly ran from his room so he could touch everything in his castle and turn it to gold. As King Midas walked down the long hallway from his room, his daughter ran to greet him. Without thinking, he lifted her into his arms. She turned into a golden statue. King Midas became troubled and sad. King Midas sent his men to find the stranger and bring him back to the castle. The men went out and returned shortly with the stranger. "Please," cried the king, "I want my daughter back." "But I thought you wanted more gold," replied the stranger. "I have learned that my loving daughter is more important to me than all the riches in the world. If only I could have her back, I would wish for no riches at all," pleaded the king. "When tomorrow's sun creeps in through your window, you will have your daughter back," said the stranger. King Midas hardly slept that night. When the new day's sun crept through his window, his daughter was in his arms again. He hugged and kissed her and delighted in the fact that she was alive. His riches were gone, but King Midas happily spent his remaining years in his castle with his loving daughter. So here are our WH cards. I hope you all got to move those cards. That's your multisensory way. A simple summary can be generated by the following questions. Who is the story about, and where and when does the story take place? So when I'm thinking about my story, I know that I have characters in my story. So I have to identify the who, the what, the when, the why, and the where. So when I think about King Midas and his daughter and the stranger, I think about those characters being the main characters of the story. And when I think about the opening where it said, King Midas lived a long time ago. Okay, so this story took place a long time ago in a castle, and that would be my setting. What happened and why? Now, for kiddos to think through the most important event of the story, what do you think the most important event of that story is? I think of the most important, what happened is King Midas was greedy for more gold and turned his daughter into gold, which was a pivotal event that caused him to realize his daughter was more important than his riches. So King Midas discovered that his daughter was more important for riches after he turned her to gold and missed her. So think about the why that happened. He had her turned back. Have your students talk about what they heard. I like to open it up to not really being a right or wrong answer. Because if the students are defending their thoughts and they're using language to talk about the story, that's their understanding and their remembering, which is true reading comprehension. Now we can debate and talk about and go back to the text, but it's the engagement of them talking about and putting their thoughts out that is important. It's beautiful. Now this would be a graphic organizer that could be used for a narrative text. I love having those cards to pull down as a multisensory because they can pull them down, they can push them back up. Oh, here's another character, here's a setting, here's a time word, here's a major event, and they can manipulate that. That's multisensory. The structure of expository text includes a subject, a main idea, supporting ideas, and details. Perhaps the subject of the text is elephants. The main idea may be facts about elephants, with the text providing supporting ideas about the size of elephants, food elephants eat, and the trunk of elephants. Let me share one more story with you today. Title is Elephants. Elephants are the largest of all living land animals and may weigh more than 12,000 pounds. The average height at the shoulder is 10 feet. At birth, an elephant calf is 3 feet tall and weighs about 200 pounds. The two kinds of elephants are African elephants and Asian elephants. African elephants are generally heavier and taller than Asian elephants. African elephants have much larger ears, which are shaped somewhat like the continent of Africa and weigh about 110 pounds each. Elephants feed mainly on roots, leaves, fruit, grasses, and sometimes tree bark. An adult elephant eats as much as 300 pounds of food a day, but it only digests half of the food it eats. Elephants sometimes walk hundreds of miles in search of water and food. The elephant's trunk is very versatile. It breathes through 2 nostrils at the end of its trunk. It can swim long distances using the trunk as a snorkel. There are finger-like parts at the tip of the trunk, enabling the elephant to grasp objects as small as a single blade of grass. An elephant calf sucks its trunk just as a human baby sucks its thumb. So that's an expository text. And here is what we want students to understand about an expository text. There is a subject, a main idea at the top, supporting ideas underneath, and then details. Now, these details give information about the supporting ideas, and we can use a 9-card pyramid. So we're going to build a card pyramid for the elephant passage. The main idea is what the text is mostly about and what the text says about the topic and subject. We're going to make a card for the main idea and place it at the top of the workspace. Facts about elephants. Supporting ideas, the information we learned about elephants could be divided into 4 supporting ideas. We learned about their size, what kinds of elephants there are, what they eat, and how they use their trunk. We write these ideas on cards and line them up in a row under the main idea card. We also learned some details, specific details about each of those supporting ideas. Now, once again, you could have your students or your child do this, or you could scribe for them. Don't let the mechanics hinder the thinking and the words that come out. So take that away if it's a barrier. We can deal with that separately. So we'll write the details in short form on cards, approximately 1 to 3 detail per card. These cards are lined under the ideas they support. So for size, we could say 12,000 pounds, 10 feet tall, and the baby elephant weighs about 200 pounds. Those would be some ideas. Once again, it's not cookie cutter. Let the kiddos put down what they remember, and then we can go back to the text and we can confirm or we can correct if you need to. I love the fact that they're thinking on the topic and pulling out, and where are they storing and retrieving that information? We could put African, the kinds of elephants that we read about were African, which have larger ears that are shaped like Africa, or Asian. We learned that the diet could be grass, roots, leaves, fruit, and they eat about 300 pounds. The trunk, we learned, is where they breathe, can be used as a snorkel. They grasp objects with those little finger-like pieces at the end, and then the baby sucks its trunk like a baby would suck its thumb. Now we can see all the elements of the expository text within our 9-card pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, they see the main idea. They can see the supporting ideas lined up under the main idea. And what I like about this passage, and the reason I like to use it, is each one of those supporting ideas was a paragraph, very sequential. And so it really is a good starter when they can see there was a section, a paragraph on size, kinds, diet, trunk. And they can see the supporting ideas lined up underneath that main idea, and the details underneath those supporting ideas give more information about those supporting ideas. Now, sometimes I like to let the students really come out with their ideas, because a lot of times the last thing that they remember or something that sticks out to them, they say is what the passage is all about. It's all about a baby elephant sucking his trunk. And it's really not all about that. So what we want to do is we want to say, is the whole passage about that, and where would that go? That is actually a detail underneath the trunk, supporting idea. So this is a way for us to really categorize and organize the information that our students remember and work with. Now, it's not over yet, which is beautiful, because we are going to number these cards. And we are going to number them so that we can generate a retell and a summary. Repetition is the key here. They've listened to it. We've created cards with that information. And now I'm going to number them. 1 is our main idea. 2 is our first supporting idea. 3 is the details about the first supporting idea. We're going to go to the second supporting idea as our number 4, and those details underneath as number 5. Our third supporting idea is number 6, and the supporting and the details about diet underneath. And lastly, our fourth supporting idea is 8, and the details are 9. Now have the students collect those cards with 1 on top in order, 1 to 9. Have them turn to a partner, a parent, a teacher, and use those cards to retell the story. And if you're doing partners, one partner can retell to the other partner. When after that's expressive language, and if I love the idea, and if you're a parent, do it with your student, because you're giving them your retell and they're receiving it. Receptive language. So you're feeding language into them. And then if they retell, they're using their language as expressive language. Great practice. But we're not done. Have the students, after finishing the card pyramid for elephants and rehearsing the summary, have them use those cards to create a summary of that passage. So this is an example summary of the elephant story. So I would like to suggest, and I put this on here, these are the first 4 activities for oral language that I used today. I would like you to take these, and I would like you to create lessons, okay, that have to do with any topic that you teach, any topic that you want your child to learn on, and incorporate language. Have them name on the topic, have them describe, read them a passage and have them retell, and ask questions on a continuum. And you can build from there for the other activities like listening. That's your bridge. You're listing, and then you can move into other texts as well to writing. Oral language activities like naming, describing, retelling, and questioning can be tied to a piece of literature. Here we have a Vimeo of a webinar using the story of Chrysanthemum. So follow us on social media because you'll get links to great resources. I've included other great resources on the topic of oral language and listening comprehension. These are some of my favorites. Thank you for joining me today.